to another episode of Real Faith, Real World with Z, advice on spirituality, life, and overcoming. This episode is sponsored by Ministry League, so please check out all that they have in the store on the website. I also want to give a shout out to lads to leaders and leaderettes for building godly leaders like myself. So let's dive right into the episode. Hello, this is Zaquan Kemp with Real Faith, Real World with Z, advice on spirituality, life, and overcoming. And today I have Mr. Don Moore speaking to us, and I have a few questions for him to answer, and we'll dive right into it. So, advice on spirituality. The first question I'll ask you is, what are some insights to your favorite verses or verse you may have?
Well, Z, first of all, let me just say thank you, for asking me to do this with you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. You are quite inspiring, really, and to see how active you are, how dedicated you are, and I know that you are just going to continue to grow into a fantastic minister, and you're well on your way. So I'm happy to do this with you today. Some insights on my favorite verses. So I had the opportunity to serve as an elder for a few years. The Bible doesn't talk specifically or provide an outline or a structure specifically for leadership, but there's plenty of example in scriptures for leadership. So Ephesians 4 verses 11 and 12 and 13 have always been the scriptures that I've turned to guide me in my spirituality in the role of a leader. So, if you look at the first part of it, you have to be, God gave us apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers. And so it's a reminder that it's a charge, really, a responsibility that comes from God. So that is like, the foundation for the spirituality of a leader, I believe. And then, so not only does it provide that, but then it provides the why to that. So I was in the, I was in the Army. I had a 21-year Army career. So whenever you were given, we called them an operations order, but within an operations order, there was a mission statement. Mm-hmm. And the mission would change depending on what was going on. Mm-hmm. But within the mission statement, there was always a task and always a purpose. Right. And so, the task then comes after, it's like at the very beginning, okay, this is the role that you're in. So now your task is, and every one of those different roles that's listed have the same task, equipping the saints. That's right. For the works of ministry, for the edification or building up of the body of Christ, to attain the full unity of the faith of full stature of the Son of God. That's right. So there's task, equip the saints, but then there's purpose, okay, for works of ministry. And building up the body and so forth. Those are really some of my favorite verses. And then, honestly, without a doubt, I relate a lot to Joshua. Probably because Joshua was a military leader above all. That's right. Obviously picked by God to be a military leader. And so I relate to him from that standpoint. I also relate to him from the standpoint of when Joshua dies and the generation that came up with him dies, the Israelites turn their back on God. So you might say the next generation turns its back on God. And we don't read of Joshua teaching or mentoring his children, or just like Moses did with Joshua, finding someone that maybe he's not related to and raising them up. And so, right now in my life, in our world, my wife and I's world, we've got 2 unfaithful children. So I can kind of relate to Joshua from from that standpoint as well. So I say that to say, obviously, Joshua 24 and verse 15.
The infamous verse.
Yes, the verse that's on everybody's wall or on a plaque on the shelf or something like that, right? Determine for yourselves,
Exactly.
who you're going to serve, the gods across the river, the gods of the people in the land you dwell. As for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. And so, that's another favorite verse. That's a goal of mine, is to bring the kids back to the faith. So those are some of my favorite verses, and I think they're very applicable, especially when you're talking about ministry.
That's right. And when it comes to just thinking about spirituality, what does it mean to you in your life? What does spirituality mean to you, Mr. Moore?
Unless it makes you uncomfortable.
No, it's okay.
No. Wow. What does spirituality mean? For me, it is striving towards becoming more like Christ. As you get older, and you'll experience that, and any young ministers that hear this, they'll experience this as well. And maybe not even just as a minister, but it's just people as we grow older. I have seen I'm more patient in my spirituality. Am more, when I'm reading my Bible, I'm asking myself, why did God say that, and why did he say it there? And obviously there's a ton of commentaries that you can refer to, but before I go to them, I like to just look at the verse or verses, the chapters, and see what's going on, and ask that question of myself. And so I think that helps with my spirituality. Being a parent helps with your spirituality. God's children were rebellious from just about day one, and so alas, that's something that we face here. So anytime you get frustrated or upset or something like that, it's like, well, wow, I can just imagine how God feels about me, or if I do something that I know he would be disappointed in, or something like that,
Yeah.
So I don't know if I really answered your question quite exactly what you're looking for, but
that's perfect. That's perfect.
But, that's something about spirituality for me.
So is there any advice you can give, not just ministers, but to people who are Christians, who are looking for, or non-Christians, just advice on spirituality?
Yes. One of the things that I've always struggled with is, there are people persons, right? And I have had to learn over the decades to be a people person. I am it comes natural to me to be very process-oriented, very task-oriented, not people-oriented. Advice would be, you may find yourself that way. I mean, I think you need to evaluate yourself and ask yourself, am I task-oriented or am I people-oriented? If you are task-oriented, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but don't let the task get in the way of the purpose, and the purpose is the people. So, I'd be lying if I said I did that very well all the time. And so, as a minister, you're doing things full time. As an elder, I was still working, a secular job as an elder. So really, you like to think that you're doing that full time, but I think it's more part time. Whereas as a minister, unless you're bivocational, then really you're doing 2 full-time jobs. Then the advice would be, don't let the tasks get in the way of the purpose, and so don't neglect your spirituality, which is easy to do. You can get so consumed with getting things done, or you'll come in, if you're a young minister, you'll come in and you want to, for the right reasons, you want to make an impact on the church. And so, be patient, come in, build relationships first.
Yes.
Obviously, this is something you got to work out with your elders. If you're going somewhere with elders, if you're going somewhere without elders, then, obviously, whoever the informal leaders are of that congregation that you're meeting with, the people that are hiring you and so forth. These are the things that you've got to kind of work out ahead of time. But don't neglect your own spirituality. You may grow in knowledge, but you won't necessarily grow in ministry. If that makes any sense.
It does.
So that's some advice I would give. If you're going in somewhere where there are elders, make friends quickly with the elders. I hope whoever's listening to this, and if you're going somewhere or you are somewhere with elders, I hope that you have the relationship where you're all one team, as opposed to, unfortunately, what we see sometimes, the employee and employer relationship, which we don't want. I don't think that's scriptural, and so I worry about congregations that are that way. So again, that's something that you want to look at and investigate. You want to be a part of the team, and if you're going somewhere that doesn't have elders, I think once you get established, you need to really start looking at what you're going to do to get elders there. Obviously, it'll be quite the challenge if you have built those relationships and come to find out no one wants to be an elder, assuming that they have, met the qualities of an elder, to start with, and that being, probably that being one of them. I think I think sometimes we're too content to just settle, and so we aren't challenging others. Another piece of advice I would give is seek a mentor. Odds are you'll probably have one already, by the time you get there. But if you don't, reach out, find a mentor, find someone, that you can at least, at a minimum, call.
That's right.
On a routine basis, and you work that out with the mentor, what that looks like, to discuss ministry things, challenges that you're facing, triumphs that you've had.
That's right.
All those things. Like I talked about in my class, the connection, to have the candid conversations, to look towards for some clarity as to where you're going to go, how to work through different situations, and then the challenge aspect, challenging yourself personally, and figuring out a way to have the influence within the congregation to challenge the congregation to grow spiritually. It's not easy. I mean, it is not easy. No. If it was easy, we probably would not have the deficit of ministers, and preachers that we have in the brotherhood. It's true. Definitely not easy. So those are some things I think are worth looking at.
Awesome. That's some good advice on spirituality, and I know for me, I would say that this is probably one of the best advice I've gotten so far, and into all this. And one of the things I will point back to what you just said is don't neglect spirituality. And I think it says in Ephesians 4, do not quench the spirit.
Yes.
Going back to your favorite verses, that's also in Ephesians 4. Don't quench the spirit, and don't exhaust it. Don't fill yourself with what tasks and everything, but stay on to what Christ is all about. And reaching our goal is to be 1% closer to Jesus Christ and to God. And so that's what spirituality can be, something similar to, all about too. And going further, life. What are a couple of life experiences that you can share that help shape your life?
Life is short. Did 2 combat tours. On the first one, I lost some men. And I'll never forget, we had obviously when we were in theater, we had a memorial service for those that had passed. And then we had another memorial service when we got back to the state. And I'll never forget, there was the wife of one of the young men who served under me. We had photos. Everybody had a photo. Individual photos, staged photos. And so we had their photos on the wall. I forget who it was, but somebody. So we were sitting, like I was sitting with the families of the two men that I lost over there, and so that's what was going on in a big banquet hall. And someone got up and we honored those who'd given their lives for the country and everything, and honored the families. And at one point, someone said, and we welcome you to take home the photo of your loved one. And the wife said, I don't want a photo, I want my husband. And so that was difficult to deal with, and just another stark reminder of how short life is, and so therefore we need to make the most of it in service to God while we're here. And it becomes frustrating the older you get, when you see, whether it be your kids or someone else's kids, and they make choices based off the fact that, and I'd be lying if I hadn't said I did the same thing when I was young, but, being invincible, it's not going to happen to me and all those things. But it does. It does happen. Yeah. And so that was one of the life experiences, I would say, that has kind of shaped me. Gracious. There's the significant events in most adults' lives. Getting married. My wife and I married in high school. So I've been married a very long time, 38 years. And so we went off to college married, and then went into the Army married. I say that to say getting married at a young age like that. I grew up in rural Arkansas, so anybody listening, yes, go ahead, make your Arkansas jokes about, teen marriage, whatever you got to do. But that forced me to have to be an adult really fast. And so, there was that. And associated with that was losing our first son. So that was a shaping experience. There's so many things that happen, in the armies. There's those things. Being asked to serve as an elder. I served as a unpaid youth minister while my wife and I were in college. We found a small congregation outside of the town. We went to school at University of Central Arkansas in Conway, Arkansas. So there's a town called Valonia outside of Conway. And there's a congregation there called Liberty Church of Christ. And so we started going there. We just failed to kind of connect to the congregations in the town, so we went looking elsewhere. And so we found them. They took us in. We were like aside from the youth, we were probably the youngest ones there. But everybody, loved on us and made us feel part of the families. I saw a need with the youth, and so I approached the elders and I said, would it be okay if my wife and I, if we did some youth ministry? We're not asking for money. I just feel like it's something that I could do. And so we got to do that for a couple of years. That was formative.
That's awesome.
So just some things like that. I've had the opportunity to preach, but like I tell people, I'm not a preacher. I'm a speecher. I'm not a trained preacher. I do what I can. So
that's all right.
That's me. But I love talking about it. I love talking about leadership. I love talking about spirituality and stuff like that. So, but anyway, those are some of the formative experiences. Am I running you over time?
No.
Okay, good.
You're good. You're good. A few more questions for you. Yeah. What's some advice you can give on life to others, similar to spirituality? What is some advice you can give about regular life for someone who's a minister, non-minister, or in general people?
Patience is a hard thing to do. The old saying, be careful. Those that pray for patience, be careful. God's going to test it. But what I found over the years is when there's a difficulty, a lot of times if you're patient enough, and there's some discernment there's some things that you should not be patient about. I don't have any specific examples off the top of my head, but I know they are there. Well, you shouldn't be patient about blatant rebellion, in your face sin. Don't be patient about that. But there's places to be patient. I have found that if you're patient, a lot of times, and you pray about it, a lot of times God has his own way of taking care of that thing, you know? So whether it be an obstacle, whether it be, thorn in the flesh like Paul endured, just certain things. I find that God will take care of some things. And then there's going to be things that aren't getting taken care of, you don't think. So it's just, it's trusting in him, like a lot of times, boy, I don't know if I should say this. I'll probably get in trouble. I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of people will pray, Lord, come now. I don't pray that prayer, and I'll tell you why. Because my kids are lost right now. And there's a lot of lost people in this world. So as bad as it is, my guess is it's probably been worse, or it's going to get worse. But I don't necessarily pray that prayer. Pray, that I'll be ready if he comes. But I don't want to be the only one that's ready. I want others to be ready too.
That's right.
So there's that. Let's see what else. Life lessons and spirituality. Well, nothing else is really coming to mind at the moment. Maybe I'll think of something else, but right now, those are, a couple of big things. I think most of us could use some improvement in our prayer life. That's one of those things, that a preacher will preach about and everybody will say, yes, we need to improve our prayer life, and then we don't improve it. We don't do anything. My prayer life is always in need of improvement. Yeah. Pray a lot. And sometimes it'll be prayers where you're down on your knees and you're sweating or crying. And sometimes it'll be prayers of thanksgiving, just as you're driving along and you see something beautiful, or walking along and see something beautiful. Just those kinds of things. Having that kind of mindset, that takes some time to develop, and some intentionality to develop that.
I would say too, to that point about praying. Sometimes when I go out and preach somewhere and driving, I know this past Sunday, went to a congregation in Alabama. Just to drive there, I just had to. I almost pulled over and prayed, but I had to keep going because I was
right. You got to be there
a certain amount of time. But just the beautiful, it was overview of the water and not in nature, and just how clear it was outside. No rain.
Yeah.
God's sun out there, and I just had to sit there and just pray for it, man. To drive or going to Georgia sometimes, it's still a good drive. Yeah, obviously crazy drivers in Georgia, but you still pray when you see nature and all those things.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And so to that point, yes,
you're seeing God's handiwork.
That's right.
And that's cool. Another thing. The older I get, the more, the easier it is for me to remember that we're all created in God's image,
That's
even
right.
the worst sinner, which is a whole other topic when you talk about the worst sinners. Anyway, any sin's bad. So.
I would say, as getting older, me and a couple guys, sometimes we go to nursing home every month. Yeah. Here in Florence, Alabama, and I'll tell you, there's nothing beautiful. No amount of money can ever afford just that time that we have together with them. And so that's a very enriching time that we have, being able to spend time with the elderly people, the wise people, as I call them, and just being able to see how much they want to be there to worship together, and have listen to young folks like myself speaking to them, and don't make the mistake of saying "I'll fly away," though.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that brings to mind some advice is work towards intergenerational ministry. The bigger a congregation gets, I think it's more difficult to do intergenerational ministry, and that's not to say big congregations are bad, or I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is it becomes more difficult, so you got to figure out a different way to do it. That's all. Yeah. But intergenerational ministry, too often we like to just separate the age groups. And yes, there's a time for that, but there's, in my opinion, more time where they should all be together, so that the younger generations are spending time and building relationships with older generations. And so they can inform the older generation of the trends and the culture and everything out there because, the older we get, the more stuck we are in what we grew up with. So they can inform that. And then the older generation can pass on wisdom. And it's good wisdom if it doesn't matter what the trends or the culture is at the time.
That's right.
If it holds true, no matter the time, no matter the age, that's some really good wisdom. And I think we deprive ourselves of that in our churches when we have too much time alone. If we're not careful in our youth ministries, for instance, our youth will have their own church within a church. And so when they graduate high school, maybe they don't go somewhere where they've got a lot of friends from their youth group that are going to college. And if that's the case, then what relationships do they have? So I think it's important to have those relationships, intergenerational relationships, intergenerational ministry. Everybody doing stuff together.
That's right. I will also take that point too. I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
To where it can be a healthy youth group who branches out to help other people in service or just having a gathering, a meal together with intergenerational. But also seeing it when they separate themselves, youth groups separate themselves from the other part of the congregation, it turns into one person or a few people getting hooked into the youth group and not being able to expand outside of that. It's dangerous though when you have someone who is not willing to let go of being youth group, but also moving on to being a leader, to being a college student or whatever category you may fit in there, but being a congregational faithful member. I've seen it sometimes where the college group won't spread out to meet other people part of the congregation. I'm like, let's go, meet this person. This person's great. Hey, look, have you met this person yet? This college student yet? Okay, here you go. And get information, all those other things, even elders. Meet the elders, meet people, be involved. Involvement is so important into ministry and into life in general.
Yeah, it shouldn't just be a workforce, right? A lot of times you'll see congregations will look to the youth and be like, "Oh, well, they can do that. They can do that work, or they can do that service project." I mean, we got to lead by example in that. And where are the relationships really going to form? When you're out there sweating together, when you're doing hard stuff together, that's when you're put in an uncomfortable situation together, that's where the relationships really form, the bonds form. And, we cannot neglect that. We'll be looking around and that generation going to walk away because we didn't give them what they needed.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. And I have one more question for you.
Okay, let's have it.
What are some personal or non-personal stories that you can give, or advice that you can give to ministers, young ministers, or those who are not ministers anymore due to something negative that happened to them?
What advice can I give them?
And overcoming those things as well.
Yeah, I get it. I really hate to hear and read or whatever when I find out that a minister is no longer in ministry. It breaks my heart, really. And so, here I go again, back to the military. There was one thing that I appreciated about the military, and that was if you were in a bad assignment or you had a bad supervisor, bad commander, whatever it was, there was one thing you could be sure of. It was going to change in the next 2 to 3 years. So a lot of times, I think, unfortunately, a lot of times, I can't say a lot of times, I don't know how often it happens. I'm afraid it happens where there's one bad experience and that's enough for ministers to get out of ministry. And, I get it. I mean, in a bad situation, the family gets attacked, you get attacked, and it is personal.
Yeah.
A lot of discerning between the personal and the not personal, it can be difficult, especially when you're younger. Well, sometimes, even when you're older, it can be difficult to discern. I just hate to see that. So I would say before leaving the ministry, if that's your first experience, and you're going to birds of a feather, what's going to happen is you're going to hear about other bad experiences, bad first experiences as well. But I'm wondering how many are hearing about good experiences, because there's good experiences out there too. So I would just say, please, please, please don't leave from one bad experience. If you can, if you find another experience to have.
Yeah.
And I gotta believe, there's so many ministry shortages out there. I gotta believe you'd be able to find something. So, something brought you into ministry in the first place. What was that? Go back and look for that, and go look for somewhere else to work in ministry. Now, I get it. If it's money and you're starving, you got to take care of your family.
That's right.
I get that. But if it's another kind of experience, then, and even then, if it's a money thing, maybe there's a bivocational opportunity out there somewhere.
That's right.
that you can find. So I would say that, and then I would be remiss if I did not mention the special friendship that I have with Matthew Marine, the preacher at Castle Rock. He had been there for just a couple of years before my wife and I went to Castle Rock. And I was young when I went into the eldership, and he's 10 years younger than me. And so we kind of grew up together, me and the eldership, and he is a minister. There's something special about that. So if you can find that, that'll carry you a long way in ministry. I mean, he and I still talk. We don't get to talk every week now. Sometimes during the year we do. But at this time, since I work for Lads to Leaders with convention prep going on there, we don't get to talk hardly at all. But that special relationship, and it's something to look forward to. If he's the lectureship and I can get to the lectureship, or, like he would have been here this weekend for this event and that kind of thing. Try to find that out there. Find that best friend. And if you are in the same congregation, that is tremendous. It's just awesome.
That's right.
It's just awesome. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I thank you for all that you do for Lads Leaders and for ministry in itself. And I know you inspired me just now, and the past 30 minutes that we had together, I appreciate you just being able to come on the podcast and share your thoughts about these questions that I had. Don, I speak highly of you. I think highly of you, and I want you to know that you have a friend in me, but you're also one of my brothers in Christ. So
That's right.
I appreciate you for your time.
Well, thank you, Z. I appreciate it.
Thank you for once again joining this podcast. And before we close, I want to end this episode with my final thoughts on what Don Moore spoke about. And I think that he's an amazing man of his tenacity and his mindset, and I just love what he had to share about those subjects. One of the things I want to share with you is, those of you who are not in ministry anymore, I want to share John 14:1. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Jesus says that to us as a reminder. We can have discouraging moments. We can have moments where we are trying to be our best. But we have this time with God to help us be encouraged and help us remain encouraged. And so Jesus says, don't let your heart be troubled. In God, believe also in me. And another interesting thing that Jesus also says is that in Matthew 11:28-30, Matthew 11:28-30, it reads, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lonely and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's a very popularized verse, or verses that helps us to remind us that when we feel burdened and weary and tired and exhausted, especially as ministers or those who aren't in the ministry anymore, those who are volunteers, congregational people, churchgoers, sometimes we get tired of work maybe of school, maybe of mental health issues. But my final thoughts is for you to know that God is there, Jesus is there. Whenever you feel troubled in your heart, wherever you feel weary or tired, just know that you have Father in heaven who loves you so much and is willing to be there for you. But before we close, I just want to always end with the gospel. The gospel is simple. Jesus was crucified, he was buried, and after the third day he was resurrected. The gospel, as it says in Romans 1:16, do not be ashamed of the gospel. The gospel brings forth salvation. It has power to save lives. It has power to reach all. So the gospel is very simple, and I want to always end with the gospel. So I pray for each and every one of you who listen to this podcast. I pray that you find it successful, and I love you, and I hope to see you next time on this episode. Thank you.